Some animals can stop their hearts and come back to life. Some can survive being completely dried out. And others can sense things that humans can't even detect. But the strangest part, these abilities are completely real. Today, we're exploring animals with abilities that shouldn't be possible, but somehow are. Animals that cheat death. Some animals don't just survive, they come back from the edge of death. First, the wood frog. During winter, its body freezes completely. Its heart stops, its breathing stops, it appears dead. But inside, special chemicals protect its cells from damage. When temperatures rise, it thaws and comes back to life. Next, the tardigrade. It can dry out almost completely, losing nearly all its water. In this state, it can survive for years. When water returns, it reactivates, as if nothing happened. Then, the African lungfish. It buries itself in mud and forms a protective cocoon. It can survive without water for months, even years. These animals don't just survive harsh conditions, they pause life itself. Animals with invisible senses. Some animals can sense things we can't even imagine. First, the shark. It can detect tiny electrical signals produced by other animals, even if prey is hidden under sand. Next, the snake. Some species can detect heat using special organs, allowing them to see warm bodies in complete darkness. Then, the bird, pigeon. It can sense Earth's magnetic field, helping it navigate across long distances. And finally, the bee. It can detect ultraviolet patterns on flowers, guiding it directly to nectar. The world they experience is completely different from ours. Animals that bend time. Some animals experience time differently. First, the fly. Its brain processes information much faster than ours. This makes everything around it appear slower. That's why it's so hard to catch. Next, the dragonfly. It reacts quickly to movement, allowing precise flight control. Then, the hummingbird. It moves and reacts at incredible speeds. And finally, the star-nosed mole. It can identify and react to objects faster than most animals. For these animals, time moves in a completely different way. Animals that live without oxygen. Oxygen is essential for most life, but not for all. First, the goldfish. It can survive in low oxygen water by switching its metabolism. Next, the turtle. Some species can survive months underwater during winter. Then, the carp. It thrives in environments where oxygen levels are very low. And finally, microscopic organisms exist that don't rely on oxygen at all. Life finds a way, even without the basics. Animals with living armor. Some animals are built to survive attacks. First, the pangolin. It curls into a ball, protected by tough scales. Next, the armadillo. Its shell acts as a natural shield. Then, the turtle. Its shell protects vital organs. And finally, the beetle. Its exoskeleton provides strong defense. Sometimes, survival means being untouchable. Animals that outsmart danger. Some animals rely on intelligence to survive. First, the crow. It solves problems and uses tools. Next, the octopus. It escapes traps and learns quickly. Then, the fox. It adapts to different environments. And finally, the rat. It avoids danger by learning from experience. In the wild, thinking can be more powerful than strength. Animals that redefine life. Some animals challenge everything we think we know. First, the axolotl. It can regenerate parts of its body. Next, the jellyfish. Some can restart their life cycle. Then, the bacteria. They adapt faster than most life forms. And finally, the fungi. They connect ecosystems underground. Life is more complex than we understand. Animals that survive extreme pressure deep beneath the ocean surface, pressure becomes extreme. At these depths, the weight of the water above is so intense it would crush most living things instantly. Yet, some animals thrive here. First, the deep sea fish. These fish have soft, flexible bodies that can withstand pressure. Instead of resisting it, they adapt to it. Next, the giant isopod. It looks like a massive underwater insect. It survives in darkness, feeding on whatever drifts down. Then, the amphipod. Some species live in the deepest parts of the ocean. They endure pressure far beyond human limits. And finally, the snailfish. One of the deepest living vertebrates ever recorded. It exists in conditions that seem completely uninhabitable. In the deep ocean, pressure doesn't destroy life. It shapes it. Animals that can stretch or transform their bodies. Some animals don't have fixed shapes. Their bodies are flexible, adaptable, almost unreal. First, the octopus. It has no bones. This allows it to squeeze through incredibly small spaces. Next, the jellyfish. Its body is mostly water. It moves by pulsing through the ocean. Then, the sea cucumber. It can liquefy parts of its body to escape danger. And finally, the starfish. It can regrow lost limbs, and sometimes even an entire body from a single part. Their bodies are not rigid, they are constantly adapting. Animals that control their environment. Some animals don't just live in environments, they change them. First, the beaver. Its dams can turn rivers into wetlands, creating entirely new ecosystems. Next, the coral. Tiny organisms that build massive reef structures, supporting thousands of species. Then, the elephant. It clears paths through forests, helping shape landscapes over time. And finally, the ant. It builds complex underground systems, changing soil and plant growth. These animals are not just part of nature, they are engineers of it. Animals that survive without food. Food is essential, but some animals can go without it for long periods. First, the crocodile. It can survive months without eating. Its metabolism is extremely slow. Next, the snake. Some species can go long periods between meals. Then, the penguin. During breeding season, it can fast for weeks. And finally, the bear. It survives winter through hibernation, living off stored energy. Survival isn't always about constant eating, sometimes, it's about waiting. Animals that use fear as a weapon. Some animals don't need to fight, they scare their enemies away. First, the cobra. It spreads its hood to appear larger. Next, the pufferfish. It inflates its body to intimidate predators. Then, the frilled lizard. It expands its neck frill dramatically. And finally, the cat. It arches its back and puffs up its fur. Fear itself can be a defense. Animals that work in perfect synchronization. Some animals move as one. First, the fish school. Thousands of fish move together in perfect coordination. Next, the bird flock. They create flowing patterns in the sky. Then, the ant colony. Each individual works as part of a larger system. And finally, the bee swarm. They act together to protect the hive. Individually, they are small; together, they are powerful. Animals that can live in total darkness. Some animals never see light. First, the cavefish. It lives in complete darkness. Over time, it has lost its eyesight. Next, the mole. It spends most of its life underground. Then, the deep sea creature. It survives in a world without sunlight. And finally, the bat. It navigates using sound instead of sight. Light is not necessary for all life. Animals that protect themselves in extreme ways. Some defenses are truly unusual. First, the lizard. It can drop its tail to escape predators. Next, the hagfish. It produces slime to block attackers. Then, the bombardier beetle. It sprays hot chemicals as defense. And finally, the skunk. It releases a powerful odor. Defense in nature can be unexpected. Animals that change the way they move. Some animals can completely change their movement style. First, the caterpillar. It crawls slowly before transforming. Next, the frog. It shifts from swimming to jumping. Then, the insect. Many go through metamorphosis. And finally, the fish. Some can move briefly on land. Movement is not always fixed, it evolves. Animals that control others. Some animals influence others in strange ways. First, the parasite. It can alter behavior of its host. Next, the fungus, cordyceps. It controls insects to spread itself. Then, the wasp. It can control prey behavior. And finally, the ant, infected. It can act under influence of parasites. In nature, control is not always visible. Animals that survive isolation. Some animals live alone for most of their lives. First, the tiger. It hunts and lives alone. Next, the leopard. It avoids others except during mating. Then, the octopus. It spends most of its life in isolation. And finally, the bear. It lives independently for long periods. Solitude can also be a survival strategy. Animals that adapt to change. Change is constant in nature. Some animals adapt quickly. First, the fox. It adapts to urban environments. Next, the bird. It changes migration patterns. Then, the fish. It adapts to different water conditions. And finally, the insect. It evolves rapidly. Adaptation is survival. Animals that live in extreme heat. Some environments are so hot, they seem impossible for life. Yet, some animals thrive there. First, the desert ant. It lives in some of the hottest places on Earth. It moves quickly across burning sand to avoid overheating. Next, the camel. It can withstand extreme temperatures without losing much water. Its body is built to survive long periods in harsh deserts. Then, the fennec fox. Its large ears help release heat from its body, keeping it cool in extreme conditions. And finally, the sidewinder snake. It moves across sand in a unique way, reducing contact with the hot surface. In extreme heat, only the most adapted survive. Animals that use patience to hunt. Not all predators rely on speed. Some rely on waiting. First, the crocodile. It stays completely still in water, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Next, the spider. It builds a web and waits for prey to come to it. Then, the frog. It remains motionless until prey gets close. And finally, the alligator snapping turtle. It uses its tongue like bait, luring prey directly into its mouth. Sometimes, the best strategy is patience. Animals that can sense weather changes. Some animals can detect changes before they happen. First, the bird. Many birds react before storms arrive. Next, the cow. It often lies down before rain. Then, the elephant. It can sense distant storms through vibrations. And finally, the shark. It can detect pressure changes in water. Nature gives warnings, and these animals can sense them. Animals that live the shortest lives. Not all animals live long lives. Some exist for only a brief moment. First, the mayfly. Its adult life can last less than a day. Next, the drone ant. It lives only long enough to reproduce. Then, the fruit fly. It has a very short life cycle. And finally, certain jellyfish. They exist briefly in specific stages. For these animals, life is short, but purposeful. Animals that use water in unique ways. Water is more than just survival. First, the elephant. It sprays water to cool itself. Next, the archerfish. It shoots water to knock insects down. Then, the otter. It uses water for play and hunting. And finally, the dolphin. It uses water movement to communicate and hunt. Water becomes a tool, not just a resource. Animals that can stay still for hours. Movement isn't always necessary. First, the owl. It can stay completely still while hunting. Next, the heron. It stands motionless waiting for fish. Then, the crocodile. It barely moves while watching prey. And finally, the stick insect. It remains still to avoid detection. Stillness can be a powerful strategy. Animals that use speed in water. Water requires a different kind of speed. First, the sailfish. It moves incredibly fast through water. Next, the dolphin. It swims efficiently and quickly. Then, the shark. It uses bursts of speed to hunt. And finally, the tuna. It travels long distances at high speed. Speed underwater is a different kind of power. Animals that can rotate their bodies. Some animals move in unexpected ways. First, the owl. It can rotate its head significantly. Next, the cat. It twists its body mid-air. Then, the fish. It turns quickly to escape predators. And finally, the insect. Some can rotate during flight. Flexibility gives them control. Animals that use sound to hunt. Sound can guide predators. First, the bat. It hunts using echolocation. Next, the owl. It hears prey in complete darkness. Then, the dolphin. It uses sound waves to locate fish. And finally, the fox. It listens for movement under snow. In darkness, sound becomes sight. Animals that survive storms. Storms can be deadly. First, the bird. It finds shelter before storms hit. Next, the fish. It moves to deeper water. Then, the elephant. It senses storms early. And finally, the insect. It hides to survive harsh conditions. Survival often means preparation. Animals that use smell to navigate. Smell can guide movement. First, the salmon. It returns to its birthplace using scent. Next, the dog. It tracks using smell. Then, the ant. It follows scent trails. And finally, the bee. It identifies flowers through scent. Smell becomes a map. Animals that thrive in groups. Group living offers advantages. First, the wolf. It hunts in packs. Next, the elephant. It protects its herd. Then, the penguin. It survives cold through group behavior. And finally, the fish. It swims in schools. Together, they are stronger. Animals that can hide underground for safety. Underground offers protection. First, the rabbit. It hides in burrows. Next, the meerkat. It lives in underground systems. Then, the snake. It uses holes for shelter. And finally, the insect. Many live beneath the surface. Safety is sometimes below ground. Animals that use energy efficiently. Energy conservation is key. First, the sloth. It moves slowly to save energy. Next, the snake. It eats infrequently. Then, the bear. It stores energy for winter. And finally, the bird. It uses efficient flight patterns. Efficiency increases survival. Final expansion before ending. When you look at all of these animals, it becomes clear that survival is not about one single trait. It's about adaptation. It's about timing. And it's about balance. Every species has found its own way to exist. Some rely on strength. Some rely on intelligence. And others rely on abilities we are only beginning to understand. Animals that change the way we see intelligence. When we think about intelligence, we often think about humans. But nature tells a different story. First, the octopus. It can solve puzzles, open containers, and escape enclosures. Each arm can even act independently, almost like having multiple minds. Next, the crow. It not only uses tools, it can create them. Some have been seen bending wires to reach food. Then, the dolphin. It communicates using complex sounds. It shows emotion, cooperation, and even play. And finally, the elephant. It remembers, it grieves, and it forms deep social bonds. Intelligence isn't one thing. It appears in many different forms. Animals that show emotion and connection. Emotion is not limited to humans. First, the elephant. It has been seen mourning its dead, returning to the same place years later. Next, the dog. It forms strong bonds with humans and other animals. Then, the penguin. Some species stay with one partner for life, sharing responsibility for raising their young. And finally, the whale. It travels in family groups, communicating constantly. These connections are not random. They show that animals don't just survive, they feel. When you look at all of this, the strength, the intelligence, the survival, it becomes clear that the animal kingdom is far more incredible than we imagine. Every creature you've seen has found its own way to survive, adapt, and thrive. And the more we learn about them, the more we realize how much we still don't know. There are animals on this planet that can live for centuries, animals that can survive in space. And some that are so powerful, they can kill without even touching you. But the craziest part, most people have never even heard of them. Today, we're exploring the most unbelievable animals on Earth. Let's start with animals that can survive the impossible. First, the tardigrade. This microscopic creature can survive extreme heat, freezing cold, radiation, and even outer space. It shuts down its body completely and waits until conditions improve. Next, the cockroach. It can survive weeks without food and even days without its head. Its body is built for resilience. Then, the Arctic ground squirrel. It lowers its body temperature below freezing during hibernation. Yet somehow, it survives without damage. And finally, the Pompeii worm. It lives near underwater volcanic vents in extreme heat. It survives thanks to bacteria that protect its body. These animals don't just survive, they redefine life itself. Some animals have abilities that feel completely unreal. First, the mantis shrimp. Its punch is so fast it creates a shockwave. The impact can break shells instantly. Next, the electric eel. It produces powerful electric shocks to stun prey, strong enough to affect large animals. Then, the octopus. It can solve problems, escape enclosures, and change color instantly. And finally, the chameleon. It changes color for camouflage and communication. Its tongue moves faster than the eye can follow. Nature has already invented superpowers. Some animals don't need size to be deadly. First, the box jellyfish. Its venom is one of the most powerful in the ocean. Next, the blue-ringed octopus. Small, but extremely dangerous. Its venom can shut down muscles quickly. Then, the cone snail. It fires a tiny harpoon loaded with venom. And finally, the pistol shrimp. It creates a shockwave strong enough to stun prey instantly. In nature, danger doesn't always look dangerous. Some animals survive by never being seen. First, the octopus. It can change both color and texture instantly. Next, the leaf-tailed gecko. It looks exactly like a dead leaf. Then, the stick insect. It blends perfectly with branches. And finally, the glass frog. Its body is so transparent you can see its organs. Sometimes the best defense is invisibility. Some animals are far smarter than we expect. First, the dolphin. It communicates, plays, and solves problems. Next, the crow. It can remember faces and use tools. Then, the elephant. It shows memory, emotion, and social behavior. And finally, the octopus. It can open containers and escape traps. Intelligence isn't just human. Some animals simply don't make sense. First, the platypus. It lays eggs, produces milk, and has a duckbill. Next, the blobfish. It looks strange out of water but normal deep underwater. Then, the goblin shark. Its jaw shoots forward to catch prey. And finally, the axolotl. It can regenerate parts of its body and stays in a youthful form. Nature doesn't follow rules, it creates them. But there's something even more important to understand. All of these animals didn't just become this way by accident. Every ability, every adaptation, every strange feature, is the result of millions of years of evolution. Take the Arctic tern, for example. This bird travels more than 70,000 kilometers every year. It migrates from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again. That means it sees more daylight than any other animal on Earth. Then there's the honeybee. It might seem small and simple, but it plays a massive role in ecosystems. It pollinates plants that produce a huge portion of the food we eat. Without bees, entire food systems would begin to collapse. Now think about the wolves. When wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park, they didn't just affect prey populations, they changed the entire ecosystem. Deer behavior shifted. Vegetation began to recover. Even rivers changed course over time. This is called a trophic cascade. One species influencing an entire environment. And then there are coral reefs. They're built by tiny animals called coral polyps. Over time, they create massive underwater structures. These reefs support thousands of species. They're some of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. But they're also extremely fragile. Small temperature changes can cause coral bleaching. And once that happens, entire ecosystems can begin to collapse. Now consider the role of apex predators. Animals like lions, sharks, and eagles sit at the top of the food chain. They help keep populations balanced. Without them, ecosystems can become unstable very quickly. For example, when shark populations decline, it can lead to an increase in mid-level predators, which then reduces smaller species and disrupts the entire ocean system. Everything is connected. From the smallest insect to the largest whale, each species plays a role in maintaining balance. Now let's talk about something we can't ignore. Human activity is changing the natural world faster than ever before. Deforestation is destroying habitats. Oceans are filling with plastic. And climate change is altering ecosystems worldwide. Take the polar bear. It relies on sea ice to hunt. But as temperatures rise, that ice is disappearing. This forces polar bears to travel farther, use more energy, and struggle to find food. Then there's the orangutan. Its rainforest home is being cleared for agriculture. As forests disappear, so does its chance of survival. Marine life is also affected. Sea turtles often mistake plastic for food. Whales can become entangled in fishing gear. And coral reefs are bleaching at alarming rates. But it's not all negative. There are conservation efforts around the world making a difference. Protected areas are helping species recover. Breeding programs are saving endangered animals. And awareness is growing faster than ever before. Even small actions can have a big impact. Reducing waste. Protecting natural habitats. Supporting conservation efforts. These things matter. Because once a species disappears, it doesn't come back. So what does the future look like for animals on Earth? That depends on the choices we make today. Some species are adapting to human environments. Urban foxes now live in cities. Birds are changing their songs to be heard over noise. And some animals are becoming more active at night to avoid human activity. But not all species can adapt that quickly. Many depend on very specific conditions to survive. And when those conditions change, they have nowhere to go. Scientists are working on new solutions. Wildlife corridors help animals move safely between habitats. Technology is being used to track and protect endangered species. And global efforts are being made to reduce environmental damage. There's still time to protect many of these animals. But time is limited. All of these animals show something important. Life on Earth is incredibly diverse. Every species has adapted in its own way. Some developed strength. Others developed intelligence. And some developed abilities we still don't fully understand. But many of these animals are also at risk. Habitat loss, climate change, and human activity threaten their survival. The deep ocean is one of the least explored places on Earth. It's dark, cold, and under extreme pressure. Yet, life still exists there. First, the anglerfish. It uses a glowing lure to attract prey in complete darkness. In a place with no sunlight, light becomes a weapon. Next, the giant squid. For years, it was considered a myth. Now we know it's real, and it can grow to massive sizes. Then, the vampire squid. Despite its name, it doesn't suck blood. It survives by feeding on organic debris drifting in the ocean. And finally, the Dumbo octopus. It uses ear-like fins to glide through deep waters, living where few predators can reach. These creatures prove that even in total darkness, life finds a way. Some animals are natural architects. First, the beaver. It builds dams that can completely change landscapes, creating entire ecosystems around rivers. Next, the termite. It builds massive mounds with natural ventilation systems, keeping the inside temperature stable. Then, the weaver bird. It creates complex hanging nests using grass and twigs, each one carefully designed for safety. And finally, the spider. Its web is both a home and a hunting tool, engineered with precision and strength. These animals don't just live in nature, they shape it. In the wild, speed can mean survival. First, the peregrine falcon. It dives at incredible speeds to catch prey mid-air, making it one of the fastest animals alive. Next, the cheetah. Built for acceleration, it can reach high speeds in seconds, but only for short bursts. Then, the mantis shrimp. Its strike is so fast it's almost invisible, faster than the human eye can track. And finally, the housefly. Its reaction time is incredibly fast, making it difficult to catch. In nature, being fast can be the difference between life and death. Communication in the animal kingdom is more complex than it seems. First, the whale. It uses long, complex songs to communicate across oceans. Next, the bee. It performs a waggle dance to show others where food is. Then, the elephant. It communicates using low-frequency sounds, traveling long distances through the ground. And finally, the firefly. It uses light patterns to send signals. Each species has its own unique code. Animals may not use words, but they are always communicating. Some animals are built for long journeys. First, the Arctic tern. It travels from pole to pole every year, making it the longest migration on Earth. Next, the humpback whale. It migrates thousands of kilometers between feeding and breeding grounds. Then, the monarch butterfly. Despite its small size, it travels across continents. And finally, the caribou. It moves in massive herds over long distances. These journeys are not optional, they are essential for survival. Some animals eat things you wouldn't expect. First, the panda. It mainly eats bamboo, despite being related to carnivores. Next, the vulture. It feeds on dead animals, helping clean the environment. Then, the koala. It eats eucalyptus leaves, which are toxic to most animals. And finally, the flamingo. Its diet gives it its pink color. What animals eat often defines how they survive. Some animals form deep social connections. First, the wolf. It lives and hunts in highly organized packs. Next, the elephant. It forms strong family bonds and shows emotion. Then, the penguin. Some species stay with one partner for life. And finally, the dolphin. It forms complex social groups and cooperates with others. In the wild, connection can be just as important as survival. Some animals are learning to live alongside humans. First, the fox. It now lives in cities and adapts to human environments. Next, the pigeon. It thrives in urban areas across the world. Then, the raccoon. It uses problem-solving skills to find food in cities. And finally, the monkey. In some places, it has adapted to living near humans. Nature is changing, and some animals are changing with it. Some animals live far longer than expected. First, the Greenland shark. It can live for centuries in cold waters. Next, the tortoise. Some species live well over 100 years. Then, the bowhead whale. It is one of the longest living mammals. And finally, the jellyfish. Some can reset their life cycle under certain conditions. For these animals, time moves differently. Some animals helped us understand the world better. First, the fruit fly. It's used in genetic research. Next, the mouse. It plays a major role in medical studies. Then, the axolotl. It helps scientists study regeneration. And finally, the horseshoe crab. Its blood is used in medical testing. These animals don't just live on Earth, they help us understand it. The animal kingdom is more incredible than we can fully understand. Some animals survive the impossible. Some have abilities that feel like superpowers. And others play roles so important, entire ecosystems depend on them. But at the end of the day, their future is closely connected to ours. The more we learn about them, the more we realize how important they truly are. Right finger, which animal amazed you the most? Right finger, and which one do you think deserves more attention? Right finger, follow for more incredible animal facts and stories. Paw.
These small animals look harmless, but they can be extremely dangerous. First, the blue-ringed octopus. It's tiny and beautiful, but its venom can stop breathing within minutes. And the scary part is, you might not even feel the bite. Next, the cone snail. It moves slowly, but it can fire a tiny harpoon filled with venom. That one sting can cause serious damage. Then, the poison dart frog. Its bright colors warn predators to stay away. Even touching its skin can be dangerous. And finally, the box jellyfish. Almost invisible in the water, but incredibly powerful. Its venom works fast and causes intense pain. In nature, danger doesn't always look dangerous. Which one surprised you the most? Like this video if you learned something new. Follow for more crazy facts like this.
Animals with the best memory. Some animals don't just remember, they hold on to information for years. First, the elephant. Elephants are known for their incredible memory. They can remember water sources across vast distances, even after many years without visiting them. During droughts, this memory becomes the difference between life and death for entire herds. Older elephants often lead groups because of this knowledge. Next, the raven. Ravens can recognize and remember human faces. If a person is seen as a threat, they can remember that face for years and even warn other ravens. This creates a shared memory within groups. Then, the dolphin. Dolphins can recognize the unique whistles of other dolphins even after decades apart. It's like remembering a voice from long ago. And finally, the squirrel. Squirrels hide thousands of food caches. They rely on memory and spatial awareness to relocate them months later. Memory, in the wild, is not just intelligence, it's survival. Animals that defy gravity. Some animals move in ways that seem to ignore physics. First, the gecko. Geckos can walk on walls and ceilings using microscopic structures on their feet. These structures create forces that allow them to stick without glue. They can run across surfaces effortlessly. Next, the mountain goat. It climbs near vertical cliffs with incredible balance. Its hooves are specially adapted to grip rocky surfaces. Even the smallest ledge becomes a pathway. Then, the spider. Spiders move with precision across webs and surfaces. They can hang, climb, and descend using silk threads they produce. And finally, the cat. Cats have a unique ability to twist their bodies mid-air. This allows them to land on their feet when falling. For these animals, gravity isn't a limitation, it's something they've learned to master. Masters of deception in nature, sometimes the best strategy is to trick your enemy. First, the orchid mantis. It looks exactly like a flower. Insects are drawn to it, thinking it's safe. But in reality, it's a predator waiting to strike. Next, the anglerfish. It uses a glowing lure in the darkness of the deep sea. Prey move closer, unaware of the danger. Then, the cuttlefish. It can mimic the appearance and movement of other animals. This helps it avoid predators or sneak up on prey. And finally, the killdeer bird. It pretends to have a broken wing. This distracts predators and leads them away from its nest. Deception in the wild is a powerful weapon. The power of sound plays a major role in survival. First, the blue whale. It produces the loudest sound of any animal. These sounds can travel across entire oceans. Next, the howler monkey. Its call can be heard for kilometers through dense forests. It uses this to mark territory. Then, the lion. Its roar sends a clear message to rivals and threats. It establishes dominance without physical conflict. And finally, the cicada. During mating season, its sound becomes incredibly loud. Entire areas can be filled with this constant buzzing. In the wild, being heard can be just as important as being seen. Animals that change their identity. Some animals can completely change their role in life. First, the clownfish. They live in groups with a strict hierarchy. If the dominant female dies, a male will change into a female. Next, the wrasse fish. It can change gender depending on social conditions. Then, the oyster. It can switch between male and female multiple times. And finally, certain frogs. Environmental changes can influence their development. In nature, identity is not always fixed, it can adapt when needed. Perfect camouflage. Some animals blend in so well, they almost disappear. First, the stonefish. It looks exactly like a rock on the ocean floor. Predators and prey often don't see it at all. Next, the snow leopard. Its fur blends perfectly with rocky, snowy environments. Then, the leaf insect. Its body shape and color match leaves exactly. And finally, the frogfish. It can change color to match its surroundings. Invisibility, in nature, is often the best defense. The power of teamwork. Some animals succeed because they work together. First, the wolf. Wolves hunt in packs using coordination and strategy. Next, the orca. They use complex group tactics to catch prey. Then, the lion. It hunts in groups to increase success rates. And finally, the ant. Ants work together in massive colonies. Alone, they are limited, together, they are powerful. Built like armor. Some animals are naturally protected. First, the armadillo. Its body is covered in protective armor. Next, the turtle. Its shell acts as a shield. Then, the pangolin. Its scales provide strong defense. And finally, the beetle. Its exoskeleton protects it from threats. Defense can be the key to survival. Extreme jumpers. Some animals rely on powerful jumps. First, the flea. It can jump many times its body size. Next, the kangaroo. It uses jumping to travel efficiently. Then, the frog. It leaps quickly to escape danger. And finally, the snow leopard. It jumps across large mountain gaps. One jump can decide everything. Seeing the world differently. Vision varies across species. First, the eagle. It can see prey from great distances. Next, the chameleon. Its eyes move independently. Then, the goat. Its pupils allow wide vision. And finally, the dragonfly. It sees almost everything around it. Their world looks nothing like ours. Preparing for the future. Some animals plan ahead. First, the squirrel. It stores food for winter. Next, the ant. It gathers food for the colony. Then, the beaver. It prepares resources in advance. And finally, the woodpecker. It hides food in trees. Preparation ensures survival. Chemical defense. Some animals rely on toxins. First, the poison dart frog. Its skin contains strong toxins. Next, the pufferfish. It carries poison internally. Then, the monarch butterfly. It becomes toxic through its diet. And finally, the millipede. It releases defensive chemicals. In nature, touch can be dangerous. Life in the cold. Some animals thrive in freezing conditions. First, the polar bear. It has insulation to survive cold. Next, the Arctic fox. Its fur protects it from freezing temperatures. Then, the penguin. It huddles to conserve heat. And finally, the seal. It uses blubber for warmth. Cold environments require special adaptations. Perfect balance. Balance is key in many environments. First, the cat. It lands on its feet. Next, the mountain goat. It walks narrow cliffs. Then, the flamingo. It balances on one leg. And finally, the squirrel. It moves across thin branches. Balance keeps them alive. Underground world. Some animals live below the surface. First, the mole. It digs tunnels underground. Next, the meerkat. It lives in burrow systems. Then, the rabbit. It creates underground networks. And finally, the badger. It builds large dens. Life underground is hidden, but active. Strength in numbers. Some animals rely on large groups. First, the wildebeest. It migrates in huge herds. Next, the sardine. It forms massive schools. Then, the locust. It moves in swarms. And finally, the starling. It creates patterns in the sky. Together, they become unstoppable. Masters of breath control. Some animals can stay underwater for long periods. First, the whale. It dives deep for extended time. Next, the seal. It holds its breath while hunting. Then, the turtle. It slows its body to conserve oxygen. And finally, the penguin. It dives for food underwater. Breathing isn't always constant. Unique movement. Movement varies across species. First, the snake. It slithers without legs. Next, the kangaroo. It hops instead of walking. Then, the jellyfish. It pulses through water. And finally, the starfish. It moves slowly using tube feet. Movement defines how animals interact with the world. The importance of play. Play is not just for fun. First, the dolphin. It plays and learns social skills. Next, the dog. It develops behavior through play. Then, the otter. It plays in water frequently. And finally, the crow. It shows playful behavior. Play helps animals learn and adapt. Navigating with sound. Some animals rely on sound instead of sight. First, the bat. It uses echolocation. Next, the dolphin. It detects objects with sound. Then, the whale. It communicates through sound waves. And finally, the oilbird. It navigates dark caves using sound. Sound becomes their way of seeing. Nature inspires innovation. Nature has influenced human technology. First, birds inspired flight. Next, sharks inspired materials. Then, geckos inspired adhesives. And spiders inspired strong fibers. Nature is not just powerful, it is innovative. Animals that use the sun and stars. Some animals don't just move randomly, they navigate using the sky. First, the dung beetle. It uses the Milky Way to roll its ball in a straight line at night. Even in darkness, it stays perfectly oriented. Next, the sea turtle. After hatching, it memorizes the magnetic field of the beach. Years later, it returns to the exact same place to lay eggs. Then, the bird. Many migrating birds use the position of the sun during the day and the stars at night to guide their journeys. And finally, the seal. It can sense Earth's magnetic field to travel long distances. For these animals, the sky is more than just above them, it's a map. Animals that outsmart traps. Some animals don't just survive danger, they learn from it. First, the rat. Rats are extremely cautious around new objects. They often test food before fully eating it, avoiding poison. Next, the fox. It can recognize traps and avoid them. Some have even been seen disabling traps safely. Then, the octopus. It can open jars, escape enclosures, and solve puzzles. And finally, the crow. It learns from experience and avoids repeated danger. In nature, learning fast can save your life. Animals that control temperature. Temperature control is critical for survival. First, the camel. It can withstand extreme heat without needing much water. Next, the penguin. It huddles together to conserve heat in freezing conditions. Then, the elephant. It uses its large ears to release heat. And finally, the lizard. It moves between sun and shade to regulate body temperature. Survival often depends on staying within the right limits. Animals with extreme endurance. Some animals are built to last. First, the horse. It can travel long distances without stopping. Next, the wolf. It can chase prey over long periods. Then, the migratory bird. Some fly for days without rest. And finally, the dog, sled dogs. They can run across frozen landscapes for hours. Endurance wins when speed fails. Animals that use light can be used as a tool. First, the firefly. It flashes light to communicate and attract mates. Next, the anglerfish. It uses glowing bait to lure prey. Then, the squid. Some species produce light to confuse predators. And finally, the jellyfish. It glows when disturbed. In darkness, light becomes power. Animals that freeze and survive. Some animals survive freezing conditions. First, the wood frog. It can freeze solid in winter. Its heart stops, yet it survives. Next, the insect. Certain species. They produce chemicals to prevent ice damage. Then, the fish, Antarctic species. They have antifreeze proteins in their blood. And finally, the tardigrade. It survives freezing by shutting down its body. Freezing doesn't always mean death. Animals that sense vibrations. Some animals feel the world instead of seeing it. First, the spider. It detects vibrations through its web. Next, the elephant. It senses vibrations through the ground. Then, the snake. It feels movement through surfaces. And finally, the insect. Many detect tiny vibrations around them. The world is always moving, and they can feel it. Animals that clean the environment. Some animals play a vital cleaning role. First, the vulture. It feeds on dead animals, preventing disease spread. Next, the cleaner fish. It removes parasites from larger fish. Then, the dung beetle. It recycles waste in ecosystems. And finally, the crab, some species. They clean ocean floors. Without them, ecosystems would collapse. Animals that use color as warning. Bright colors can mean danger. First, the poison dart frog. Its bright colors warn predators. Next, the monarch butterfly. Its colors signal toxicity. Then, the coral snake. Its pattern warns of venom. And finally, the ladybug. Its color warns predators to stay away. In nature, color can save lives. Animals that adapt quickly. Some animals change fast to survive. First, the bacteria. It adapts rapidly to new conditions. Next, the insect. Many evolve quickly in changing environments. Then, the fish. Some adapt to polluted waters. And finally, the bird. Some species change behavior in cities. Adaptation is key to survival. Animals that use echoes. Some animals rely on sound reflections. First, the bat. It uses echolocation to hunt. Next, the dolphin. It detects objects through sound waves. Then, the whale. It communicates across distances. And finally, the cave bird. It navigates darkness using sound. Echoes become their vision. Animals that hide in plain sight. Some animals are invisible even when visible. First, the stick insect. It looks like a branch. Next, the leaf-tailed gecko. It blends perfectly with leaves. Then, the octopus. It mimics textures. And finally, the flatfish. It blends into the ocean floor. Sometimes, the best hiding spot is right in front of you. Animals that change behavior at night. Some animals come alive after dark. First, the owl. It hunts at night. Next, the bat. It feeds in darkness. Then, the fox. It becomes more active at night. And finally, the leopard. It hunts under cover of darkness. Night offers protection and opportunity. Animals that share food. Some animals cooperate. First, the vampire bat. It shares food with others. Next, the lion. It shares kills with the pride. Then, the wolf. It feeds the pack. And finally, the bird, some species. It feeds others in groups. Sharing strengthens survival. Animals with natural weapons. Some animals are born armed. First, the scorpion. It has a venomous stinger. Next, the snake. It uses fangs to inject venom. Then, the rhino. It uses its horn. And finally, the crab. It uses powerful claws. Nature equips animals for defense and attack. Animals that learn by watching. Learning can come from observation. First, the monkey. It learns by watching others. Next, the bird. It copies behavior. Then, the dolphin. It learns socially. And finally, the wolf. Young wolves learn hunting from adults. Knowledge is passed down. Animals that protect their young. Protection is essential. First, the elephant. It defends its young as a group. Next, the bird. It builds nests for safety. Then, the crocodile. It guards its eggs. And finally, the penguin. It protects chicks in harsh environments. Survival begins with protection. Animals that use tools creatively. Some animals innovate. First, the crow. It shapes tools. Next, the chimpanzee. It uses sticks. Then, the otter. It uses rocks. And finally, the octopus. It uses objects as shelter. Creativity is not just human. Animals that change ecosystems. Some animals reshape environments. First, the beaver. It builds dams. Next, the elephant. It changes landscapes. Then, the coral. It builds reefs. And finally, the ant. It alters soil structure. They don't just live in ecosystems, they shape them. The balance of nature. Everything in nature is connected. Every animal plays a role. Predators control populations. Prey supports ecosystems. And even the smallest creatures matter. When one part disappears, everything can change. Nature is not random. It's a system built on balance. All of these animals, from the smallest creatures hidden beneath the ground, to the giants roaming oceans and skies, they all have one thing in common. They are part of a system that has been evolving for millions of years. Every ability you've seen, every adaptation, every survival strategy, is proof that life on Earth is far more complex than we imagine. But here's the reality. Many of these animals are disappearing. Not because they failed to survive, but because their world is changing too fast. And that makes this more than just a story about animals. It's a story about balance, about survival, and about the future of life on this planet. Because in the end, protecting them means protecting everything.